образованието и уменията. Днес ще бъде официално представен докладът на ОИСР «Образование и умения в България». Кулминация на близо 2 години тясно сътрудничество на Министерството на образованието и науката с дирекция «Образование и умения» на Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие. То е важен етап в пътя на България към присъединяване към ОИСР. Път, който отразява нашия общ ангажимент към по-силно, приобщаващо и устойчиво бъдеще чрез образование и умения. В откриващата сесия на днешното събитие участие ще вземат министърът на образованието и науката Красимир Вълчев и директорът на дирекция образование и умения в ОИСР и създател на международното изследване ПИЗА Андреас Шлайхер. След представянето на доклада, днешната програма ще продължи с 2 панелни дискусии, които ще разгледат как България може да ускори усилията си за осигуряване на базови и трансверсални умения на своите граждани. Панелите ще предоставят възможност за по-задълбочено разглеждане на някои от препоръките в доклада и за споделяне на опит от държави членки на ОИСР с цел превръщане на политиките в реални действия. Първия панел – от учебната програма до класната стая. Превръщане на амбициите в действие за всички ученици ще обсъди политики, които България може да приложи, за да гарантира, че предвидената компетентностно ориентирана учебна програма реално се преподава, оценява и усвоява в училищата. Втория панел – от план към напредък. Как да заработи Съветът за политики в областта на уменията. Ще се съсредоточи върху скорошните и текущи усилия на България за разработване на национална стратегия на уменията и ще изследва как Съветът за политики в областта на уменията може да бъде структуриран, функциониращ и ефективно оценяван, за да се премине от намерения към реален напредък. Преди да започнем по същество, няколко организационни бележки. Устройства за превод са налични на регистрация. В реално време ще има превод на английски и на български език. Изберете канала за български език. Онлайн стриминг. Събитието се излъчва на български език на Facebook страницата и YouTube канала на Министерството. Докладът е наличен на страницата на ОИСР към 9 часа тази сутрин, а на интернет страницата на Министерството на образованието и науката към този час вече е качено и преведеното резюме на доклада с обобщение на препоръки. Сега давам думата на Наталия Митева, съветник на министра на образованието и науката, която ще модерира дискусията на високо равнище с участието на министър Красимир Вълчев и господин Андреас Шлайхер. Заповядайте.
Добро утро. Дали се чува? Да, чудесно. Добро утро и от мен. Огромно удоволствие е да мога да модерирам този откриващ панел с двама визионери в образованието, нашия собствен министър на образованието и науката, министър Красимир Вълчев, и визионера на образователните политики в глобално ниво, автора и създател на изследването ПИЗА и наш приятел и поддръжник, господин Андреас Шлайхер от Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие. Преди да им дам думата, бих искала да споделя с вас само няколко думи за ОИСР и за процеса по присъединяване. ОИСР, накратко, е глобална организация с над 60 години опит в подкрепата на по-добри политики за по-добър живот. Със своите 38 държави членки от Азия, Европа, Америка, Тихоокеанския регион, тя предоставя платформа на правителствата за обмен на политики, на практики и възможност да повишат стандартите си в области като образование, дигитализация, пазар на труда и опазване на околната среда. България е една от 3 европейски държави, които в момента са в процес на присъединяване заедно с Румъния и Хърватска. Този процес не е просто техническа или дипломатическа стъпка. Това е възможно да се закрепят националните реформи в международно признати стандарти, да се изградят устойчиви институции и да се постигнат по-добри резултати за българските граждани. Като човек, който води този процес по присъединяването на България в областта на образованието и науката в последните 2 години, бих искала да ви споделя, че това не е самоцелен процес и той не е само технически процес. Това за нас е важна стъпка като държава да се присъединим към клуба на именно тези държави в света, които искат да обменят опит една с друга, за да могат да станат по-добри. Това не е процес, който следваме, защото някой ни е казал. Това е клуб, в който искаме да бъдем, за да може не просто нашето образование да стане по-добро спрямо себе си, но да можем и ние да покажем на други държави по света какво работи при нас, къде иновираме, какво ни прави по-смели, къде българската образователна система се справя успешно. И разбира се, да почерпим опит от други държави, за да не откриваме всеки път решенията сами. Докладът "Образование и умения в България", който ще видите, за който ще чуете днес, има пряка роля в целият този процес на присъединяване на България към ОИСР. Той предлага задълбочен анализ на българската образователна система и системата ни за умения. Той е плод на дългогодишен труд и на експертите от страна на ОИСР. Подчертава постигнатия напредък и формулира някои съвсем конкретни препоръки, които са конструктивни. Много от тях ние вече сме идентифицирали на национално ниво, върху много от тези проблеми вече се работи. В рамките на тази сесия, и веднага давам думата към по-интересните говорители след мен, в рамките на тази сесия ще чуем на високо равнище размислите на двете водещи фигури в образованието, които обявих малко по-рано: министър Вълчев, Андреа Шлайхер. И ще си дадем отговори на някои въпроси. Защо България търси членство в ОИСР в момента? Какви са националните ни политики в образованието? Как те се позиционират спрямо световните тенденции в образованието? Къде се крият най-перспективните възможности за съвместна работа и учене между България и ОИСР, особено във връзка с прилагане на препоръките от доклада или някои предизвикателства, които ние вече сме идентифицирали на национално ниво, върху които работим. С това давам думата на господин Красимир Вълчев, министър на образованието и науката, да сподели своите размисли, своята визия за реформи в образованието и ползата от сътрудничеството с Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие. Министър Вълчев, заповядайте.
Благодаря. Благодаря на Наталия за медиаторство. Благодаря и за това, че последните 2 години тя работи активно с Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие, на която ние разчитаме да направим най-важните реформи. Благодаря на господин Шлайхер, че за пореден път е в България, с което той показва ясното си отношение към страната и към българската образователна система. Надали има човек в света, едва ли има човек в света, който по-добре да познава образованието в целия свят. И неговия опита на Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие за нас е изключително ценен. Българската образователна система в никакъв случай не е реформирана. Ние само преди 10 години променихме всички сегменти на системата. Проблема е, че една част от промените не дадаха необходимия резултат, други бяха откровенно в грешна посока, трети може би случихме и успяхме да направим положителни промени. И аз и друг път съм казвал, че ако искаме да вървим напред, да подобряваме резултатите, ние трябва да бъдем честни и да се признаваме грешките. Докладите на ОИСР, ПИЗа ни дават едно добро огледало. Те ни го дават отдавна, но ние трябва внимателно да разчетем резултатите от тези доклади, от това огледало. Нашата образователна система традиционно е настроена към предоставянето на знания, прекалено амбициозна в предоставянето на знания и прекалено неамбициозна в формирането на умения. Проблема е, че с последните промени в учебните програми тя още повече затвърди това, вместо да направим промяна в обратната посока. И както Асен Александров е дала пример с леката атлетика, ние готвим децата за гюлет ласкачи, живота изисква те да са спринтьори и ПИЗа мери доколко могат да спринтират. Но гюлет ласкачите, както знаем, не са най-добрите спринтьори. Отворили сме всички основни теми, всички основни инструменти за промяна в системата, и учебните програми, и оценяването, и образователната структура, и подготовката на учителите, и закона за предучилищното училището образование. Смея да твърдя, че от обсъжданията, които сме имали последните месеци, пък и преди това, когато министър беше професор Цоков, имаме относително съгласие за посоката, в която трябва да променим системата. Имаме и амбицията да го направим. Започнали сме работа. Проблема е дали ще успеем да го направим и как ще го направим, защото и предишните пъти сме имали добри намерения, но не сме успявали да ги направим по най-добрия начин нещата. Сега очевидно някои неща трябва да ги направим различно. Една от най-добрите гаранции да ги направим по-добре е да партнираме с Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие и съответно с нейното съдействие и с други страни. Това си говорихме и с господин Шлайхер преди да започне този форум, че ние ще разчитаме да направим един такъв семинар такава среща или семинар и с други страни, за да проведем този разговор. Стартираме работа по учебните програми, този път с обсъждане на посоката за промяна, както общата посока на промяна в учебните програми, така и по отделните предмети. Стартираме с обсъждане, макар че това е по-бавният подход, защото предишния път обсъждането беше след изработването на учебните програми. Работните групи, които правиха учебните програми, нямаха ясно задание. Идеята е този път тези документи, които ще изработим, визии или концепции, да бъдат задания на работните групи, да има политическо лидерство, т.е. да не бъде хвърлена тази работа на работните групи, а да има отговорник, който да следи за посоката. И ако сме казали, че тези програми трябва да имат по-малко образователно съдържание, че трябва да ги оптимизираме, то някой трябва да следи това да се случва, защото предишния път ние правихме все по-тежки програми, все по-амбициозни програми, защото груповото поведение от работните групи беше това не може да отпадне, това не може да отпадне, всеки иска децата да знаят колкото него, всеки в работната група. Липсваше ясно задание за посоката и в крайна сметка се получи това изкривяване. Това се говорихме и преди този форум. Аз имам две основни притеснения. Едното, че правим нещата прекалено бързо, другото, че правим прекалено бавно. Прекалено бавно ги правим, защото времето върви бързо, защото има неща, които предишни години, десетилетия не сме направили, трябвало да направим. Министерството и въобще административните структури традиционно са тромави организации, правят нещата бавно, а другото, че ги правим прекалено бързо, защото изискват сериозно обсъждане. Изискват обсъждане с много хора, изискват внимателна работа. Това, което трябва да направим, тук са колегите от Министерството, да разширим работните групи. Ние в момента сме направили общо взето по една среща, да разширим работните групи с повече външни експерти, повече външни заинтересовани страни, защото когато се затворят между хората от Министерството и системата, винаги се получава един вид изкривяване, което сме го виждали в други подобни формати. А в случая е важно да имаме визията за това къде ще бъдем след 15-20 години, защото като умения, защото тези програми, вероятно, ако ги направим, ще действат и след 15 години. Още по-важна е реформата в оценяването. Сега много от нас, от вас знаят, които са хора, работещи в системата, че учителите по-често се равняват не към учебните програми, а към оценяването, към външното оценяване, към тестовете и съответно ние трябва да направим тази реформа в оценяването, за което разчитаме на Организацията за икономическо сътрудничество и развитие, да променим културата на преподаване и културата на учене. Имаме стартирала работа заедно с ОИСР и благодарим за подкрепата на организацията и персонално на господин Шлайхер. Разбира се, важни са и темите образование и грижа в ранно детско развитие, темата, която трябва да направим интегрираната политика, да направим квалификацията ранна детска грижа, защото рискуваме да останем без хора в яслените групи. Ние правихме редица крачки, но те все още са недостатъчни и не дават необходимите резултати, така че трябва да продължим с работа. Трябва да намерим начин от една страна да бъде тази работа по-интензивна, от друга страна да я направим правилно, защото, пак казвам, ние често, макар и да сме водени от добри намерения, не успяваме по най-добрия начин да направим и учебните програми, и реформите в другите сегменти на системата. предизвикателства и с квалификацията и подготовката на учителите, които като че ли най-трудно адресираме и най-трудно се справяме. Трябва да подобрим методическата работа в системата, трябва да подобрим наставничеството, планирането на квалификациите, все неща, които не трябва да чакаме закона, това си говорихме, трябва да започнем и това през лятото да правим. Приключвам до тук, защото много по-ценни са думите на господин Шлайхер. Аз лично с внимание слушам голям интерес всяка една негова дума, защото тя е изключително ценна. Благодаря.
Благодарим ви, господин министър. Тъй като тук са много представители на училищната система, както и на граждански експертния сектор, аз ще си позволя с многото шапки, които нося, да ви благодаря за коража. Историята обича смелите, не винаги им е лесно, но може би имаме шанс да се запишем в историята като хора, които поемат рискове и прескачат дори някои еволюционни стъпки понякога, за да могат да направят образованието си не просто релевантно на съвремето, но и такова, каквото може да отговори на бъдещето, на изискванията на бъдещето. Искрено си го пожелаваме това да се случва в партньорство, разбира се, и с ОИСР, и с световните най-добри практики, но най-вече зависи от нас. С това аз искам да представя най-влиятелния, без да преувеличавам, най-влиятелният човек в образованието на световно ниво. Човек, който консултира всяко правителство, което се допита до него. Човек, който сигурно всеки трети ден е в различна държава. Това също не преувеличавам. Дойде тук от Исландия, едва хвана полета в Париж, за да дойде. Не беше спал цяла нощ. Идва за трети път в последната година и половина, за да подкрепи една държава, която се стреми не просто към членство в ОИСР, която въпреки, че смени 4 правителства в периода, от когато той за първи път дойде тук, иска да направи от образованието си висок стандарт за образованието в световен мащаб. Държава, която иска да инвестира в бъдещето си, която цени младите си хора и децата си, в която образованието е ценност. Благодарим на господин Шлайхер и на целия му екип за невероятната работа. Върви с тях комуникация и работа по много проекти много тази работа не се вижда. Но това, което се случва, е, че те винаги са на наше разположение и първото нещо, което казвате, как можем да ви подкрепим. Имаме рядкото удоволствие и огромната възможност да чуем лично от Андрея Шлайхер какво прави едно образование успешно, на къде можем ние да вървим, как този доклад, който е изготвен за България, може да ни бъде от помощ и въобще няколко окуражаващи думи за това как България се справя, къде България се справя добре. Андреас, заповядайте.
Thank you so much. And first of all, I want to say what a privilege it's been to follow Bulgaria for many years on its education journey. Minister Valchev, you've highlighted many challenges the country faces in education, and you'll find them in our report. But at the very same time, I have seen few countries that over many years have been as consistent and as intentional to improve their education pathways than Bulgaria. And that is something that I take away from you. You know, I hope that the OECD membership, the countries from the OECD can bring something to Bulgaria. But what I take from Bulgaria is really your relentless commitment, even when things are difficult, to advance the education agenda and to do that consistently across government over time. I think that's the one lesson I want to really highlight. It's been an amazing privilege to work with you. And that is also why Bulgaria is ready for membership in the OECD, at least in the field of education. Membership in the OECD is not about being number one on every chart. Membership in the OECD really is about working together to create better policies for better lives and to ensure in this field of education that we educate young people for their future, not just for our past. Now, you can ask yourself, the OECD, the E, is about economics. Why do we talk about education? Why does the OECD put so much effort on education? And the answer is very, very simple. Our schools today will be our economy, our society, our democracy tomorrow. No. These are the foundations that we build, and this is why we at the OECD attach so much importance to those kinds of outcomes. Now, if you ask yourself, how this world has changed over the last years, just in terms of technology. 20 years ago, you could say, learning to read was very simple. It was just about extracting knowledge from prefabricated texts. When you didn't know the answer to a question, you could look it up in your school book and you could trust the answer you find to be true. Today, when you don't know the answer, you try to look it up on ChatGPT, on Google, but you never know whether the answer you find there is true or not true, right or wrong. Literacy today is no longer simply about extracting knowledge. It's about constructing knowledge. A very different skill set. You can see say the same about, mathematics. Mathematics is no longer just about knowing formulas and equations, but can you think like a mathematician? You understand the idea of an exponential function rather than just know how to calculate it, the procedures. We live in a totally different world, and the world will continue to advance. And compared to that, in the OECD as well as in Bulgaria, our education systems over time have not really seen the level of progress we would like to see. Now, you can say, well, Bulgaria has closed some of the gap towards the OECD. If you look at the broad trend lines, you think from 2006 to today, there has been significant progress. In the case of Bulgaria, the gap is closing, but still, both the OECD and Bulgaria see challenges. Our education systems face this challenging world, but are not advancing as rapidly as we need to. That's really the challenge, and you can see it's not a challenge that Bulgaria faces alone. It's a challenge that the industrialized world faces together. There are exceptions to this. We do see countries, if you look, to the north of Europe, to Estonia, if you look to the east, Singapore, if you look to the west, Canada, there are education systems that are advancing. But they are the minority. Most education systems face a challenge, and that's why working together on those challenges is so important. And even, if you look to the overall success of the education system, it's not just about raising average, it's also about reducing disparities. Now, you can see when you look at the variability in school performance, it's very high in Bulgaria. There are some excellent schools, in fact, many excellent schools. But there are also many schools with big performance challenges. And it is not just about poverty. It is not just about geography. There are many schools in many areas that need to advance. At the very same time, international comparisons show that you can make the closest school the best. If you look to the left side of the chart, you can see some countries where variability in the quality of education is much less pronounced. They are able to attract the most talented teachers to the most challenging classroom. They get the best leaders into the most difficult schools. So it shows we can change those things. But even advancing academic performance, I can show you the case of Japan, #1 in the OECD in academic knowledge, mathematics, science, reading. Japanese are very, very strong. But if we only look at this, we miss out many things that are also important in this 21st century. You can see, for example, Japanese students are not so happy children. No? You can see their psychological well-being is not well developed. They do not show the level of agency and engagement that you want to see. This world no longer rewards you just for what you know. No. Google knows everything. This world rewards you for what you can do with what you know. That's, as Minister Valchev has highlighted, this is why the skills angle is so important. the capacity to mobilize your cognitive, social, and emotional resources to do things. You can see Japanese are not very resilient. Can you reimagine yourself when the world around you changes? Very important in the world in which you live. So what I'm saying here, our traditional metrics of success in education, academic outcomes, are very important, but they are not everything. You can look at Bulgaria. Academic outcomes still need a lot of improvement. The yellow bar is not very long. At the same time, you can see actually Bulgarian students show a lot of psychological strengths. They have that resilience that you need today. Those kinds of attributes are ones that our education systems also need to value. But you can actually improve everything. You can see in the case of Denmark, for example, you don't have to compromise academic excellence by strengthening skills. That's what many people believe. You know, if you put more emphasis on skills, you will lose out on academic excellence. No, you know, as you can see here in the case of Denmark, they're very strong academically, very strong in terms of their agency, their capacity to do things. They have that resilience. They have the strong social relationships. So that's really what international comparisons show us. We can advance the education agenda in many fields without losing something. Academic knowledge and skills are not two opposing ends on a large spectrum. They're two sides of the same coin. That's really, I think, so important. How do we do this? You know, of course, money is important. No. You can see very clearly that there is a positive relationship between what we invest on education on the horizontal axis and the quality of learning outcomes on the vertical axis. But you also see that line becomes flatter and flatter as we spend more money. The United States spends 10 times as much as Vietnam, and Vietnam gets better results. Money alone is not sufficient. How we invest those resources, how we align resources with needs, how do we prioritize spending choices? If you have to make a choice between a better teacher and a smaller class, go for the better teacher. That's what we can learn from the most advanced education systems, putting the priority on the quality of human resources, the leadership in schools, the quality of teachers, quality of learning environments. And you can see Bulgaria is pretty much where you expect it from its investment, you know, putting more resources into the future of the country could be a good promise to actually raise outcomes. But at the same time, as you move on that trajectory, investing your resources wisely is equally important. And our report looks at this as well. We look at the early foundations in education. We look at schooling. We look at learning beyond school, including vocational education training. How can we make vocational education the first choice for young people, not a last resort? How can we make sure that it really integrates the world of learning and the world of work? How do we look at this in conjunction? And I just want to highlight a few kind of policy challenges. The first is, you know, education will only succeed as a whole of society enterprise. It's very, very hard to improve education if you just, you know, push a lever on school improvement or universities. You need to bring different segments of society together. A great illustration is early childhood education in Bulgaria. I commend you for the effort you put on the early years. It's actually a big success story in Bulgaria, ensuring that we build foundations early on in the lives of children. In the past, you know, we focused our effort on school, but in the early years, we built those foundations for school. We also focus on the kind of skills that are most influential later in our lives: curiosity, courage, leadership, empathy. These are the skills that we can develop best in the early years, but we can only do so if we develop an integrated approach to education. If you look at a country like Bulgaria, you know, part of the early childhood education is run by the Ministry of Education, another part is run, you know, by the Ministry of Health, and, you know, creating a kind of holistic approach wherever children are, that they are served by one system with one vision, so incredibly important. And you can say the same thing about adult learning. When you think about who is responsible in Bulgaria for the skills of people, many actors, many departments, many ministries. That's why we commend your country for creating a skills policy council, bringing actually the different actors in society together to actually think about how we can create this holistic vision that it doesn't matter who runs that part of government, but it matters, the outcomes that are being achieved, And I highlighted this in the key field of the early years because this is an area where, despite growing investments, Bulgaria still has homework to do. Making sure that, the investment in those early years actually are congruent with the quality objectives. Sometimes, we think, well, schooling is so important and maybe the qualifications of childhood, is people in childhood are not that important, but it's actually the other way around. Sometimes it's easier to be a school teacher, where children can express themselves, they can actually, advance their own education agenda. But, in early childhood education, the skills of teachers are actually critically important. Putting that money into this is very important. And I already highlighted, the governance challenge. When you compare Bulgaria with the OECD average, there's still work to do to coordinate all of those pieces better together, to bring those, to align those different pieces. And again, that's why in the field of adult learning, the Skills Policy Council becomes such an important instrument in the field of early childhood education, ensuring that the Ministry of Health and the Ministry of Education work together on one vision for early child development is critically important. And so what you can do in this kind of world is basically to take those steps towards coordination to ensure that the governance arrangements are coherent and well aligned, and also to improve data. You cannot improve what you cannot see. And ensuring that different stakeholders have access to relevant, high-quality information throughout the system. Making the invisible visible through high-quality information system is another very, very important part of this equation. Let me focus on a second policy lever. And Minister, you have already highlighted it, the importance to attract, develop, retain, and advance teachers. The quality of education can never exceed the quality of teachers. Everybody knows that. But how do we attract the best minds into the profession? It's not so much a matter of, how many hours of learning. It's more about the quality of learning. And I want to show you this just with one example. On this chart, you can see the number of hours that 15-year-olds learn in school in blue and then out of school in green. The green part could be private tutoring, could be homework, those kinds of things. And you can see it varies a lot. If you go to Morocco, students study close to 50 hours every week. If you go to Switzerland, it's less than 30 hours. Huge differences in the volume of learning time. But when you look at productivity, you can see in Switzerland, students learn a lot in very little time. And in Morocco, students spend a lot of time and learn very little. It's not so much a question of the number of hours that students spend learning in school, but it's about the quality of the instructional environment. And when you think about curriculum development, this is not about the volume of material. In fact, it's the opposite. The secret to high quality education is to teach fewer things in greater depth. And that's actually, I commend your efforts, Minister, on actually putting greater rigor into the curriculum, greater focus, more coherence. It's easy to add things to our education systems. Everybody will be happy. It's very difficult to take things away that are no longer relevant, that no longer solve social purposes. But that's exactly what high quality education is about. To make those deliberate choices in the design of the curriculum. What is it that will prepare young people for their future, not our past? What is it that they really need. And that's why the curriculum design is so important, the curriculum advancement, having a clear vision for every subject. What is it that we want to achieve? Not developed by those who own the subjects, who are the specialists, but by those who will actually need those skills in our societies, in our economies. People who are the users of those kinds of skills, people who can help us raise and improve productivity. And teaching fewer things in greater depth, greater focus, greater rigor, cognitive demand. It's not volume. That's what we can learn from a country like Switzerland on this. The other part to the equation is, how do we get our teachers aligned with that vision? It's easy to write a curriculum. It's very, very hard to put it into classroom practice. One angle to this is the metrics that you use to make success visible, the assessment and evaluation. If you have a battle between the curriculum and the assessment will win every time, because the assessment is what sends the signals to help students learn better, teachers to teach better, schools to become more effective. So it's very, very important to ensure that the metrics reflect what we value, not just what we can easily measure. But the other dimension to this is teacher-professional collaboration. Sometimes we think, oh, well, we need to advance teachers, we help them, we train them. It's not enough. When you ask yourself, what do the most advanced education systems do? They create an environment where teachers work together to frame good practice, where they have a career in front of them, where they can make choices, where they are not just the users of the curriculum, but the designers of innovative learning environments. That collaborative culture, and you can see in this chart very clearly where teachers teach jointly, where they observe other teachers' classes, where they engage in joint activities, where they're engaged in collaborative professional learning. These are the teachers that have a greater sense of self-efficacy. Ownership of professional practice is so important, building the environment for this. If you ask yourself, what are the different steps? It all starts with, building the foundations for effective kind of teacher development. Ensuring that we select the right candidates. How do we motivate young people to move into teaching and not to become lawyers or administrators, but actually to become teachers? By making this work both financially attractive, and again, Bulgaria has done well on that over the last years, really significantly increasing teacher salaries. That's a good thing. But the other part is to make teaching intellectually more attractive, to make it really an inspiring, interesting profession. And that's the part where perhaps more work needs to be done so that teachers, have a clear pathway for their professional career, that they work in this collaborative culture, that they have great supporters in their leadership, that they become not only great instructors, people who deliver the curriculum. Technology can do that tomorrow better, maybe. But that teachers become good coaches, good mentors, good facilitators, creative designers of innovative learning environments. That's what the future curriculum is about. Then also developing incentives for people to advance in their career. That's also really, really important. If you become a teacher today and then, 20 years from now, you're still doing exactly the same work in exactly the same places, you will not be inspired. But creating that pathways for professional growth that allows teachers to advance their careers in ways that work for them. How do we facilitate quality, meaningful, ongoing learning? Very, very important. And last but not least, how we create that ecosystem that puts all of this together so that teachers can flourish intellectually and also have the means for doing that. It's a very, very difficult agenda, but this is what curriculum implementation is ultimately about. Not what we write into a book, but what actually happens in the classroom. And that is very much framed by the people who do this work and by the work environment that they encounter. Money is important for that, resources are, but so are other things. So that's really the policy lever I want to come next. Now, advance efforts to implement the competency-based approach to learning. Learning is not just about the accumulation of knowledge, but learning to actually extrapolate from what we know, to apply our knowledge in novel, unfamiliar situations. That's what the world increasingly demands from this. And that's actually, what the results from PISA show for Bulgaria. Bulgarian students are very, very good in reproducing what they have learned. They get many of those kind of test questions right. But they have often great difficulties to apply, to use. That skills-based angle is incredibly important in the world in which we live. We also see that, there are big challenges for the most disadvantaged. You can see the level of underachievement in Bulgaria is still the highest in the OECD. There are some students, many students who achieve excellent results. And at the very same time, there's a long trail of students who do not even meet the baseline of performance. And in the past, that was actually quite effective. If you think 20, 30 years ago in our economies, we only needed very few people who, run our systems and then a lot of people who work for them. There was a very efficient way of building human talent. Today, we need everybody. That is the big difference. If our skills are polarized, our economies will be polarized. Our democracies will become polarized. So ensuring building strong foundations has become an incredibly important imperative. And that means also giving young people greater ownership and discretion of what they learn and how they learn and where they learn and when in their lives they learn. Providing a more flexible approach to the curriculum, giving young people meaningful choices when they advance through their careers. To create pathways where we recognize what are the strengths of students. How can they advance their knowledge and skills best? This is what it means to provide success for everyone. If you put everyone through exactly the same system, some will succeed and some will fail. We want everybody to succeed. We have to understand how different learners learn differently, what inspires them, how we can best support them. That is, what the future of education is about. That's what the transition into the world of work and our societies is really, really about. And it's not as easy as giving young people more choices. Creating a supermarket for students will mean that, students choose what is easy for them today, but not necessarily what's in their long-term interest. So helping young people to make the right choices, to ensure that there's good guidance, good career aspirations, that young people can see the future. You can never be what you cannot see. And that's what we see in the case of Bulgaria, that many young people do not have the career aspirations that fully utilize their talent because they've not seen those things. So better integrate the world of learning. That's why your efforts to strengthen vocational education and training is so important. That this is not a last resort for students who are not successfully academically, but a very, very first choice, like it is in some other countries. So facilitating student transitions in and through and out of the system is incredibly important, so that students have clear futures, clear pathways. And that's actually an area where, to some extent, Bulgaria has been very, very successful. If you think 10 years ago, 15 years ago, early school leaving was an incredibly important problem in this country. Many young people did not succeed in the school. They left the school system. They had nowhere to go. Today, actually, Bulgaria is pretty much where Europe is in basically achieving a good level of outcomes on this. So again, it's an encouraging insight, but ensuring that people not just leave school successfully, but that success is something that gives them a future, that gives them a career, is where the future really, really is about. And that is what it means by building kind of the student pathways throughout their learning that capitalize on their strengths, that help students, nurture their talent, understand why they are here on this planet, what they can achieve in their lives, that gives them the tools to realize their vision and serve an economic and social purpose, and strengthen engagement also with the rural areas. I'm very privileged to speak from people from across Bulgaria here. Now, you come from very different contexts, very different realities, very different kind of parts of the education system, and still, to make sure that there is a common vision that young people, wherever they grow up, have a future, a bright future in front of you. And that is really what education and skills in this century is about. And that's what our report and analysis is about. And once again, you know, at the OECD, we feel very privileged to have Bulgaria as a very strong force in our work in the OECD. And we look forward to this collaboration. Thank you.
Много благодарим на господин Шлайхер за тези прозрения и за няколкото фокуса от доклада за България, както и референциите към това, което вече се случва при нас. Имаме само няколко минути до кафе паузата и трябва да се движим по график, но мисля, че имаме възможност за по един съвсем бърз въпрос или възможност от двамата ни панелисти да рефлектират върху това, което се представи днес. И към министър Вълчев съвсем набързо от това, което видяхте в презентацията на господин Шлайхер и вашата заявка за реформи, кое може би е един акцент, който бихте извадил от това какво можем да заимстваме от техните препоръки и да добавим към нашия амбициозен списък с заявки за бъдещи реформи или промени? Имаме ли нещо ново, което ни даде този доклад, с който можем да подобрим плана си за, да кажем, за следващата година и половина?
Това, което като че ли не сме поставили като достатъчен акцент към момента в работа, можем допълнително да повишим усилията, е образованието и грижата в ранна детска възраст. Това си мислех. И работата с данни. Управлението на работа. Управлението на системата въз основа на данни са две теми, които не сме поставили в фокуса. Надявам също така социално-емоционалното учене да успеем да го поставим като тема, както в контекста на учебните програми, това, което правим като промяна в учебните програми, да успеем да вплетем в тях социално-емоционалните умения в достатъчна степен, така че това само бих добавил към думите ми, които по-рано казах.
Благодаря ви. Господин Шлайхер, ние говорихме по-рано с министъра преди да започне това събитие, както и на предишните ни срещи, за амбициозната задача, която сме си поставили за реформи в учебните програми, но и за промяна на националните оценявания. Вие говорите често за това каква е ролята на оценяванията за промяна на културата на системата. Бихте ли ни казали нещо повече в тази посока?
Yeah, you know, the assessment is what the curriculum will look to people in the system. Now, the teachers will see the curriculum through the assessment. The parents will see the curriculum through the assessment. So ensuring that what we measure is very closely aligned with the vision of what we're trying to achieve is incredibly important. You know? If there is ever a battle between the assessment and the curriculum, the assessment will win every time. That's why getting that right is very important. And creating, you know, also a broad vision for the curriculum is important. That what young people learn in school is not just driven by the expertise of people in a specific subject like science or history, but it's driven by how young people will use those skills in their future, how they will grow beyond their specific skills in their future, how they will adapt to new fields of knowledge. And so both in the assessment and in the curriculum, focusing on fewer things and going deep, helping young people to not only learn knowledge in history, but to be able to think like an historian. Do you understand how the narrative of your society has emerged, how it developed, how it advanced, sometimes how it unravels when the context changed? Can you think like a scientist? So I think that is very, very important that those things are highlighted in the curriculum and the implementation and then in the assessment. The assessment done well will be your biggest ally for a faithful implementation of the curriculum.
И последен, може би, въпрос към вас. Едното нещо, което българските ученици показват, че могат много добре на ПИЗа, е знания. Те знаят много, те могат да отговарят на въпроси за знания, те възпроизвеждат знания. Там, където резултатите ни са по-ниски, е в приложението на знанията. Но как се завърта една цяла култура към приложение на знанията? Говорим за реформа в учебни програми, оценяванията. Какво да направим още, за да подкрепим учителите, за да променим тази култура в посока, в която нашите ученици ще бъдат по-добре подготвени за бъдещето?
Yeah, it's a challenge that many countries have been facing because, in the tradition when we didn't have, technology around us, we needed a lot of knowledge and we could learn for our life. We used to learn to do our work. But now learning is the work. That is the big transition. The test for people in today's life is not what you learn in school, but your capacity to acquire new knowledge, your capacity to expand your horizon, your capacity to use your knowledge in a new context. So it is a culture change. As you highlighted, it's not just about, doing something slightly different. It's really about a culture change. And you can actually go back to your own school experience. The scientific experiment that you will remember is the one you did, not the 20 experiments your teachers talked about. And so giving young people more room actually to do things in school, to try out things, to take risks, to make mistakes, to learn from and with mistakes. I think it's very, very important students, learn to take ownership of their learning experiences now. For our teachers now, to ensure that they become good coaches, good mentors, to understand how different students learn and can accompany them on their journey. So those are the kind of transitions that you need to see on the student, on the teachers. And, what you can do to facilitate that transition is, on the one hand, relieving the system of unnecessary burden. Everything that is in the curriculum should be thoroughly tested against those who use those skills. Is that what we need in tomorrow's world? Not maybe today's and yesterday's. Everything in the curriculum should be tested against it. Only what, survives it is very important. I think that's the help that you can give teachers, that you do not overburden them with material, but that you provide them actually with, that capacity to see the essence, the core. A good curriculum doesn't tell you what you should be doing. A good curriculum tells you what you should be achieving. What is the result that you want to see? How does, great mathematics and science performance and, history, religion, whatever you look at, how does it actually look like in a good performance? No? And then, teachers need to take greater ownership. So creating spaces for teachers, no? Creating a collaborative culture is incredibly important. If you do that alone in the classroom, you will very quickly run into difficulty and you will not solve those, and you will go back to what you know best, which is teaching like you taught in the past. But if you have your colleagues around you working together, observing each other's classrooms, building, opportunities for collaborative learning, having good evaluation assessment, good technology, those kinds of tools can help teachers to accompany them on their journey. Communication with parents is very, very important. And it's not an easy task for a teacher. The minister will tell them, educate competence, you educate for the future. The parents would say, well, I want my child to learn what made me successful. And I'm very nervous when my child learns something that I no longer understand. So parents will not be your natural ally. You have to enlist them on that course. You have to take the courage, that leadership to communicate. And again, the role of teachers in this is critically important. They will be the ones who are the trusted source for teachers. They need to be able not only to read the curriculum, but to own it, to understand it. So enlisting teachers in the design of the process. I'm very inspired by your, groups that you are creating here to build the curriculum vision, to bring those who are using that material early on into this process so that they become, I think that's a very, very important part. You will not implement, if you explain to people what to do, they will do what you say, but it's just compliance. They will do tomorrow something else. If you explain them why you do that, they will take ownership. They will take this deep kind of commitment for this transformation. And ultimately, it's about leadership. I think if the teachers in the classroom, the leaders in the school understand this is a vision for the long run, it's not a kind of political cycle. It's something that the country is moving towards. If they can understand that this is going to be implemented coherently over time. And again, it's not an easy task. You need, as a teacher, you need to live the future today that you want to see in your students tomorrow.
It's not easy for anyone. As a policymaker in education, you need to see the long term of the country in order to help guide the short term decisions. And I think, but again, what my, advice is, look at the countries that have made that transition. Bulgaria is not at all alone in this. Most countries in Europe are on a similar kind of pathway, some much faster than others. No? And it's not so much about what you write down, it's really about implementation.
Това, което мислех да кажа за край на панела, е това, което каза Андрея Шлайхер в последните си изречения. България не е сама в посещането на тези предизвикателства. И както често стигаме до този извод, учителя е може би най-важният фактор в системата. Инвестицията в учителите е ключова за промяната на културата и за подготовката на културата на образованието на цялата ни система и за това да можем да подготвим младите си хора не просто за днес, за утре, но и за много години напред. Благодаря на двама ви за изключителния панел. Беше удоволствие. Нека да ги аплодираме мистер Вълчев и Андрея Шлайхер.
Уважаеми гости, сега ще направим кратка кафе пауза. Молим представителите на медиите да се присъединят към нас в съседната зала за пресконференция с министър Вълчев и господин Шлайхер. За всички гости очакваме ви отново в 10:30 за следващите сесии. Време си. Точно си. Какво казваш? Здравейте отново след кафе паузата. Продължаваме с дискусия за ключовите послания и препоръки в доклада на ОИСР за образованието в България. Те нямат задължителен характер, но са важна основа за един по-широк национален разговор, основан на международния опит за повишаване на качеството, равнопоставеността и ефективността на управлението в образователната система. Дискусията ще се проведе в два панела с участието на български и международни експерти. Ще разгледаме конкретно как страната ни може да ускори усилията за изграждане на основни и трансверсални умения, както у учениците, така и във всички граждани през целия им жизнен път. Тема, която е в центъра на националните амбиции, както чухме и тази сутрин. Започваме с първия панел. От учебната програма до класната стая, превръщане на амбициите в действия за всички ученици. Разговорът ще се съсредоточи върху прилагането в училищата на учебна програма, базирана на компетентности. Вече при мен на сцената са професор Галин Цоков, директор на Институт по образованието и бивш министър на образованието и науката. Елън Томпсън, главен инспектор по образование, спорт и наука на Франция. Мачей Якубовски, директор на Националния институт по образование, Полша. И сега давам думата на Лин Абираат, политически анализатор ОИСР, която ще модерира този панел.
Thank you. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this first panel of today's seminar, which will focus on one of the core reforms that is actually ongoing in Bulgaria, which is the curriculum reform. So I'm very pleased to be welcoming you all and seeing many familiar faces and some new faces as well. The session today will start with a brief overview of some of the findings and recommendations in the report. But the heart of the session is really the discussion that will follow later with some of the OECD peers as well as the national experts who will talk about the real life challenges they face in doing some curriculum reforms and what are the policy trade-offs and what are the success factors to bring those to life. So without further ado, I will start my quick presentation. There we go. So as you know, over the past decade, most OECD and EU countries have undergone curriculum reforms to modernize instructions and to really equip students with the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that they need to thrive in the 21st century. There has been a general recognition that subjects like math, reading, and science are necessary, but they're not enough to be able to ensure that students can thrive in an ever-changing world. So this has been reflected in curricular frameworks or learning frameworks that are international and regional, such as the OECD Learning Compass, which you can see on the screen, which has included transversal competencies such as creating value, resolving dilemmas and tensions, and taking ownership. So across all of those countries that implemented curriculum reforms, there has been a real challenge in translating what is intended into the curriculum that is applied and acquired. And this is because curriculum implementation is a complex process. It involves different actors, from teachers, students, parents, even the media and politicians. It interacts with different policies such as teacher training and assessment, and its interpretation varies across contexts, not only between countries, but also within the same country. So if curriculum designers fail to consider how it will be interpreted and how it will be enacted by others, and how it will interact with different policies, then it's very hard to make sure that what is intended is what is applied and what is acquired. So Bulgaria is no exception. As you know, a competence-based curriculum was implemented around 10 years ago with the Preschool and School Education Act. And while there has been great progress in some of the other educational reforms that were introduced, for example, expanding access to education, reducing dropout, and closing the gaps in educational material across school contexts, changing classroom practice and raising student outcomes has been a bit slower. So Bulgaria's PISA results point to a large share of students that do not meet basic proficiency in math, reading, and science. Also, we can see that there hasn't been significant progress over the years, with a negative trend in more recent years that can be observed across OECD and EU countries as well. So the report highlights policies and good practices from other countries that Bulgaria could consider in order to make sure that its competence-based curriculum reaches the classroom. I will not be able to cover those in a lot of depth, but as I said, the aim of this session is really to hear from the panelists that we have. So the first recommendation is that Bulgaria further develops some of the teaching and assessment resources that have been helpful in other OECD countries with competence-based curricula to support teachers in interpreting the curriculum and implementing it in the classroom. This can be learning standards and learning progressions used in Scotland or New Zealand, for example, but also more practical tools like report card templates that are used in France, so that teachers can track students' progress against the core competencies. And Bulgaria, we know, has a suite of curricular documents like syllabi and standards, but these can benefit from being more practical and more exemplified. So, for example, they can provide more concrete guidance to teachers on how to integrate transversal competencies into traditional subjects, and also how to design assessment tasks that measure applied learning, not just learning that is memorized and recalled. So through a technical support instrument that is joint with Romania and funded by the European Union, we have the pleasure to be working with Bulgaria to develop some of those core curricular resources as we accompany them in their lower secondary curriculum reform. So the second recommendation is about the assessments. And we heard today that assessment has a large influence on what happens in the classroom. And so our report suggests changes to the design and the reporting of both the national assessment and the Matura to ensure that they are used as tools that promote learning and teaching in line with the curriculum. So to do so, first, we suggest that the national assessment's formative use is reinforced, for example, by removing the selection function after grade 7, by changing the timing of the administration from the end of cycle to for example, the middle of the cycle or even the middle of the academic year, and by providing teachers, school leaders, and regional education department heads with analysis that is benchmarked against comparable schools and comparable regions so that they can situate their students' performance against meaningful benchmarks. Similarly, changes to the design of the Matura, like including maths as a mandatory subject, shifting the grading from normative to criterion reference grading, and including items that measure higher order competencies or applied learning, can make it a more useful tool for certifying learning against the curriculum and making sure students are ready to enter into higher education. So here, item banks have been very useful in OECD countries to support standardized and competence-based assessments. Last but not least, something that was discussed in the opening session. The review also encourages Bulgaria to learn from the experience of OECD countries in setting up professional learning communities. This will be very important because TALIS data, so our Teaching and Learning International Survey, shows that Bulgarian teachers view continuous professional development to have a very limited impact on their practice, while collaborative learning is seen to be positively associated with innovative, more effective teaching practices, and, as Andrea said, more self-efficacy. So, for example, you can learn from the case of Victoria in the state of Victoria in Australia, which highlights the need for strong pedagogical leadership to create a culture of team learning in a school, but also centralized resources that can help focus discussions in the school on improving practice. In Bulgaria, providing more opportunities for principals to receive training both before they enter their role and throughout their career in their role to develop their instructional leadership skills will be a very important lever to improve teaching practices and learning. So with this introduction, I want to, these are, old slides, but I want to introduce our panelists today. So who will be able to tell us firsthand how they've managed curriculum reforms in their context, what are some of the lessons that they have learned, and what are some of the good practices that they want to share with us today. So I'm pleased to welcome Professor Tsokov from Bulgaria, Ellen Thompson from France, and Maciek Jakowski from Poland. So I will move from here. So maybe let's begin with Bulgaria. We heard today from the minister of your plans to reform the lower secondary curriculum, to foreground competencies and to reduce the curriculum overload. What, in your view, are some good practices that you can take from the previous curriculum reforms? And what are some of the lessons learned that you should consider as you go forward?
Първо, добър ден на всички. Радвам се, че днес можем да дискутираме точно препоръките по отношение на положителния доклад за сферата на образованието, който имаме от ОИСР. И това, че в него се подчертава, че последните 10 години всъщност в нашата образователна система са случени положителни реформи по отношение на въвеждане на учебни програми, основани на компетентности. Аз ще продължа това, което подчерта и министър Вълчев, че всъщност реформата, положителната промяна, така да наречем, в нашата образователна система не започва сега, още 2016 година. За съжаление, тогава всъщност това, което е постигнато на ниво държавни образователни стандарти в рамките на общообразователната подготовка, където те са ориентирани изключително компетентностно, свързани с формиране на конкретни умения и то по етапи на обучение, не отделен клас, на практика не се принася и по някакъв начин не се структурира в учебните програми, макар че те са ориентирани към компетентности, в тях има интердисциплинарност, има и прекалено много излишък от очаквани цели, от подробност от понятия, особено по някои учебни дисциплини. И това всъщност води до едно претоварване на самите учебни програми. Те стават много стръмни, особено в етапа на основно образование, тъй като поради промяна в структурата на нашата образователна система, част от учебното съдържание в гимназиален етап, там където има профилирана подготовка, на практика се структурира в по-долните нива на етапи на класове на обучение. И по този начин всъщност учебните програми в някаква степен отново акцентират по-скоро към овладяване на знания, възпроизвеждане на знания, повтаряне на тая култура на възпроизвеждане на знания, а не към фокус върху уменията и прилагане на уменията на учениците. Тук има и още един проблем, който е свързан с промените тогава, който може би ще се дискутира и в бъдеще в нашата образователна система. Промяната в структурата и намаляването на времето на основно образование. Всъщност завършваш клас става 7, а не 8, както е до тогава. И всъщност това още повече концентрира учебно съдържание в рамките на общообразователната подготовка и всъщност от държавите в ОИСР България е единствената страна, в която основното образование се завършва в 7 клас. Последните месеци всъщност Министерството на образованието и науката, екипа на министър Вълчев положи много усилия за изработване на платформа за промяна на учебните програми. И аз се радвам, че още в началото на месец февруари бе публикувана една концепция за учебните програми, която в много отношения представлява всъщност един национален план, една национална конкретизация на компаса за учене 2030 на ОИСР. Защото всъщност в този документ основните промени, които се очакват през следващите години, са свързани с компетентностни рамки в учебните програми, акцент върху овладяването на уменията, а не само възпроизвеждане на знанията на учениците, намаляване на учебното съдържание и по-голяма рамковост на учебните програми по отделните предмети. Също много важен елемент е свързан с акцента върху хоризонталните умения и доктор Шлахер подчерта преди малко колко важни са социално-емоционалните умения за развитие на децата и за успеха на всяка образователна система, но към тях трябва да добавим и екологичните, дигиталните умения, които са изключително важни за съвременен човек. Всъщност тези хоризонтални умения ще присъстват в рамките на отделните учебни предмети и това ще ги учебни програми по отделни учебни предмети и това ще ги направи много по-модерни и действени. Другата посока на промяна, която се предвижда е в по-голямата интердисциплинарност, в дискутиране на глобални теми, върху определени общи проблеми, свързани с съвременния свят, така както в Финландия това е феминологията, както в Съединените щати са глобалните въпроси, върху които дискутират учениците. Тази интердисциплинарност до сега не присъстваше такава степен в нашите учебни програми и на базата на тази концепция и концепциите по отделните учебни предмети може да ги направи много по-модерни и действени, защото всъщност в цялостното образование днес всъщност се вижда модела на образованието на 21 век, изграждане на цялостни представи на учениците за света, който ги заобикаля. И само още нещо, с което искам да приключа. Всъщност в тази концепция е обосновано и това, че учебните програми трябва да се разработват на базата на определени компетентностни профили, на определена класификация, таксономия, на базата на която да се изграждат уменията на учениците по отделните учебни предмети. Още по-радостно е, че последните месеци и седмици има отделни групи, които работят по конкретни учебни програми, по учебни дисциплини на базата на тая концепция и се надявам, както и министър Вълчев подчерта, че през следващите месеци, година ще може да се стигне до определени много по-компетентностно ориентирани, много по-действени учебни програми по отделните учебни предмети. Благодаря ви за сега.
Thank you so much. So it's great to hear both what you've identified as issues, but also how you plan to address them going forward, including in changing the process. You mentioned horizontal skills, and I know that's something that France has worked recently to embed in their curricula. I have a question for Ellen on what were the most effective policies that were used in France to help teachers adapt their approach to the new expectations in the curriculum.
Thank you, Lynn. Dobre utro. That's where my Bulgarian stops. France has indeed made substantial efforts to embed competencies, particularly key transversal skills, into its national curriculum, aiming to promote cross-curricular learning, to support teachers in adapting to these evolving expectations. Several policies and support mechanisms have been put into place. I'll try and give you a quick breakdown of the most effective ones, followed by areas where we still have a lot of scope and room for improvement as well. First of all, and the main key, I think, is the common core of knowledge and skills, which was then later referred to as the Common Core of Knowledge, Skills and Culture. It's a framework which outlines what every student must know and master by the end of compulsory education. Compulsory education in France is from age 3 to age 16. It was first introduced by a law in 2005, but really implemented in 2015. So you see, it took us a long time to actually implement what was written in a law. It represents a body of knowledge, of skills, of values, of attitudes, which are necessary for students to succeed in their education as individuals, as you just said, and as future citizens, which is something very important in France. We're creating the future citizens of our democracy. What we have is a personal competency booklet. I'll talk a bit more about that later on, which allows for tracking the students' progress. And since 2011, the validation of this common core has been required to obtain our national diploma, the brevet, which is basically the end of our lower secondary diploma. The general philosophy is that this framework, the core, aligns with the reform of school curricula, as recommended by the OECD, and it highlights the 8 key competencies which were defined in the European Parliament in 2005. So communication in the mother tongue, communication in the foreign tongue, mathematics and science, digital competencies, learning to learn, which I think is something that Andreas Schleicher insisted on earlier. It's not just about the knowledge, it's about learning to learn. Social and civic competencies, sense of initiative and entrepreneurship, and cultural awareness. I'd say that for the first time, the Ministry of Education in France committed by law to ensure that all the students effectively master this core through various mechanisms and provide more support to those who need it most. So individualized support to students, educational assistance, personalized educational success programs. And for students experiencing big difficulties, let's say, there was remediation during regular class situations. And I'd say the teachers had to provide differentiated activities in class. That's what was offered. As well as this core curriculum, the other few things that we have going is interdisciplinary practical teaching, which was introduced into lower secondary education as part of the 2016 reform. And this requires teachers from different subject areas to work together and to deliver projects that address real-world problems. So it gets teachers working together. So it's that collaborative learning also that Andreas Schleicher was on about earlier. I think this has been one of the most structured efforts to promote cross-curricular teaching, encouraging not only collaboration, but also innovation, because we're addressing worldwide problems. Obviously, we have teacher and professional development training. And the French Ministry of Education has rolled out in-service training modules in public teaching training systems. And we have online resources as well. You talked about digital resources. We also have these. And they provide pedagogical tools, lesson examples, frameworks to try and support competency-based teaching. So the teachers all have access to this wherever they are in France. And we have digital platforms which also offer, I'd say, curated multimedia content that supports interdisciplinary teaching. These resources are widely accessible. Even you can access it from here. And they're also aligned with curriculum goals. Despite all these efforts, because we've been working on this for quite a few years now, we still have challenges. Several challenges persist. Teacher confidence is one of them. Many teachers still report that they feel underprepared. And we see this in the Thalys reports that come out. They're underprepared to shift from content delivery, so just delivering the knowledge in the way probably that they learned when they were young, to competency-based approaches, especially for cross-curricular work. So they feel underprepared for that. I don't think that our pre-service training really always provides adequate grounding in interdisciplinary pedagogy. That's where we need to improve. Also, we have limited time with school schedule and very rigid subject boundaries. Like, I'm a maths teacher, this is my subject. I'm a French teacher, this is my subject. Oh dear, you're walking on my feet. So this is sometimes something that we find with teachers. The interdisciplinary subject, the teaching that I talked about, is very promising. But it also depends, and that was spoken about as well by different people. It depends on the local context, but also depends on the leadership in the schools. We found that the leadership can really improve the way that interdisciplinary teaching is promoted. And then there are assessment practices, but I think we'll come back to that later.
Thank you so much, Ellen, for all of those practical examples of what's been done in France to really support teachers to interpret and implement the curriculum. I want to turn to Poland, which has had a long-standing experience with curriculum reforms dating back to the 2000s and is currently kind of reconsidering those reforms. From your experience, what have been some of the good practices that have helped make this reform such a successful reform that's widely cited internationally, but also what lessons do you want to share with Bulgaria in terms of sustaining those reforms in the future?
Sustaining reforms is probably the most difficult part of it, but yeah, it's a long trip. I mean, we started with the reforms around 1998, 1999. That was a large reform. I would call it rather a revolution in our system. And then over 20 years, we were climbing all the rankings, including PISA, but also Teams, PIRSA assessments in primary school. So the main improvement was after the reform was introduced around 2000, and that reform had, I would say, 4 pillars. One was curriculum, about which I will talk a little bit more in a while. So one was changing the curricula to core curricula. So saying, these are the things we want to achieve rather than what you have to do in every class. That was a big change. But I was also accompanied by kind of the centralization also in the textbook market, for example. So we freed the textbook market. We allow teachers to use different sources at their lessons and so on. So that also shows the second pillar. The second pillar was autonomy of teachers. So we gradually, it wasn't like overnight, but we gradually were sending a signal, let's say, to teachers that you are more and more responsible for what's happening in the classroom. So first, they started with a prescription, basically, what you have to cover in every class. Then we gave them a choice of textbooks and told them, okay, you decide what methods and what approaches you will use. And then it comes to the third pillar. Then we said, okay, so if you have so much freedom, then we want to hold you accountable. So we introduced national examinations at the age of primary and local secondary and upper secondary schools. So these are standardized exams in core subjects. These are exams which are conducted by external bodies, Central Examination Board. They are evaluated externally. We also introduce some more like let's say assessment for yourself in fourth grade, which also became like a national exam almost because everyone was doing it. But the whole idea is that, I call it a soft accountability system because we have results which are reported for every school, but not for every teacher. We have results which are comparable across the country. And I would say teachers, complain a lot about them, that we have these exams and we have to teach 2 exams and so on. On the other hand, even if you are the lowest performing school on these exams, you don't have any consequences really directly attached to that. It's just a signal that you are not doing well enough. And the fourth pillar introduced in 1999 was the centralization. So, it's very nice to say, let's introduce all these changes, But it's very difficult to manage all these processes in schools. And at that time, we reasonably say, okay, managing schools in terms of infrastructure, employment, and so on will be transferred to local governments. Many people were complaining, including local governments, because that's a lot of responsibility, also financially. But I think that was also a part of the success, because over 20 years, we see local governments managing infrastructure and so on very effectively. On the other hand, at that time, we also assumed that local governments will be responsible for quality of teaching. And there are some countries which went into this direction, I would say. Czech Republic, for example, even saying even local governments can design their own curricula. And I think that was over-optimistic, because at the local level, you don't have really capacity to think over about the curricula, all these things. So that was the first stage. After that, we climbed in all the surveys, and the quality clearly improved. But then around 2007, 2006, we started discussing that that's not enough, because our teachers were already we saw they were more independent and so on. We also, maybe that's a fifth pillar, but that's related to autonomy. We also reserved a lot of money for professional development, continuous professional development. We have a new system for advancing through professional ladder, which basically created an incentive for all teachers to participate in professional training continuously. But then in 2008, we introduced new curricula. We said we actually believed that at that time our schools are ready, but no, it took like 9-10 years. So we then said, okay, we move to core curriculum, which is entirely written in the language of learning outcomes. So we don't even mention how to achieve them. We have some suggestions in additional materials, but the law basically states that at the end of the fifth grade in primary school, you have to do this and this and this in mathematics. And the examinations were also accordingly changed. We also, in examinations, we asked to introduce more like, PISA-like items, so more showing applications and real-life references, and so on and so on. And now we are at this stage when we again want to revise the curricula, because what we see is that, okay, after the pandemic, you can see the Poland was one of the top performing countries. It was close to, same results as Finland and so on. And then we declined after the pandemic. We had some political decisions which were not entirely correct, not entirely evidence-driven, but still we see other problems in our schools. So we teach mathematics perfectly, but even our best students who are performing at the level of Singapore, Finland, or whatever, they still very often say, I'm not good in mathematics. I'm not confident sufficiently. So what we are doing now, we talk a lot about agency. And for me, fascinating is that talking about agency with mathematics teachers is the most difficult part of my job. Because mathematics teachers have something like, at least in Poland, has this feeling like you are born to learn mathematics or you are not. It's just given. And we just tell them it's not true. Look at Singapore or Estonia, for example. The difference between Poland and Estonia is not about top performing students. It's about students who are lagging behind. And we are telling them, look, you can teach everyone the same way, but that they still believe they can do math, they can apply math, they can use it in life, and they are good in mathematics. So using the agency, giving some agencies, giving some self-confidence. And another change for those low performing, we say also, there is no excuse for having so many students not mastering level 2. We were just saw the PISA level 2 data. Poland is actually much better than most European countries, but still, you have more than, around now, we had less than 15%, but now we have 20% of 15-year-olds who are not mastering level 2 in PISA in mathematics, in reading, which means basically what they learn in school, they cannot use in their lives because they don't have enough knowledge. So we want to send a strong signal to teachers that we will not accept that. But we will also support you. So we are developing a lot of tools, including professional development, but professional learning communities, but also diagnostic tools, and then addressing the needs of students, learning needs of students, to not have an excuse that some students do not master, basic calculations by the 8th grade. There is no reason for that, and we want to make sure that all of them can also read. So we call it foundational skills, which will basically give basis for everything later in their education and real life. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving such a comprehensive view of curriculum reforms and touching on the different policies that interact with it, and that you cannot address one without the other. It's a package that comes together, and that feeds nicely into the second line of questioning that I wanted to get your views on. So we heard a lot about assessment and that you cannot have curriculum without assessments. These are two sides of the same coin, and that even if you decide on what you want students to learn, what they end up learning is determined a lot by how you measure it. And so I want to turn to France first now. I know that France has invested a lot in shifting the assessment culture in schools from one that has been traditionally very summative to a more formative assessment culture. What are the policies and tools that you have put in place to support that shift? What has worked well, and in your view, what still needs to be done?
Well, since 2019, the Ministry of National Education has organized national assessments of students' knowledge at the start of upper secondary, so basically grade 10, in mathematics and in French, in general and in vocational studies. So that was the first point. So we've got a little bit of history on that. I'll come back to that. But then our PISA results were not good at all. So the ministers wanted to address this subject. So in September 2024, so even more recently, new national assessments were introduced in different grades in primary school and at the beginning of lower secondary school as well. The idea being that they're very formative assessments. So the teachers have the assessments in French and mathematics at every level, basically, of elementary school, and then that allows them to better monitor the students' progress, but also at the entrance of lower secondary and the entrance of higher secondary. Maybe if we look at the grade 10 ones at the upper secondary level, which we have quite a few years of background now, even our short vocational students who have a 2-year project have this assessment when they come in. They take a diagnostic test in French, in maths, in sort of like 5 key competencies. It's automatically corrected. I think that's important because one of the queries that you could have is, how do the teachers, have all this time? No, it's automatically corrected online. So the whole of September, all of our students all over France at grade 10 are taking these national assessments. So it lasts about 3 weeks. The schools get the input back straight away. Teachers get the results, parents get the results, head teachers, principals get the results, and they're also the regional authorities and the national level. So it allows also for the schools to compare themselves with the local level, regional level, national level. These positioning tests are basically designed to provide teaching teams with objective data and not just an overall score of like 250 out of 400, but really with the different competencies where the students are failing, where they're managing, to address learning difficulties as early as possible. We've just had this new reform in 2024, which is called the clash of knowledge, basically, in France, with the idea that these tests, which are very formative, these assessments, serve not to rank students, but to sort them into different groups for the different learning competencies. So they're all together, the students, till about October. Then for some lessons, they're divided into different groups according to where they managed and succeeded in some competencies or where they were weaker in others. So this is the new idea with these national assessments. They also provide school leaders with an additional tool guide to manage the pedagogical practices in their school, within their institutions, allows them also to sort different schedules out with the teachers according to the pupils' needs. So that's interesting. And national results, obviously, we're hoping to see improvement in national results because the idea is this data helps to move our policies and helps to move also the results of our country. As well as these national assessments, we have the National Student Record Book, which I talked about later, which is a digital portfolio used across primary and lower secondary schools, and it tracks students' progress and competencies, helping, again, the teachers to identify their needs, to personalize their learning, and it encourages regular feedback rather than just marks on their own. And I'd say maybe that's where we have some scope for improvement. There can be a cultural resist to change in France. France has a very traditional view of academic disciplines, hierarchical structures in France, very disciplinary, very maths, French, look at the marks. If the marks are good, it's okay. But as we saw earlier, it's not necessarily because the marks are good that the students are actually learning to use and to apply this knowledge later on. So we do have a bit of a cultural resistance to change. This is quite often the case in France. Many educators, many parents remain focused on the marks of the exams, of the final exams, rather than the progress that their children and that the students are making throughout the year. So here we have definitely a bit of scope for improvement. And I think we still need to carry on implementing this in how schools and teachers can use these formative assessment tools. Some schools, some teachers still rely on traditional grading, as these grades are used afterwards also to go into higher education. So there can be too much focus on this, which also creates big stress with us at the end of the final year of upper secondary with the baccalaureate. No longer are they really looking at the results of the baccalaureate, but they're looking at the results of all the traditional grading throughout the year, which allows them to go on to higher education. So this is where maybe we can improve still.
Thank you so much, Ellen. I wanted to move maybe more from classroom-based assessment and national assessments to exams. And you mentioned, Maciek, that this is something that was introduced as part of your curriculum reforms and was a key element in kind of raising expectations of students and teachers, but also having this sort of soft accountability. What are some of the design elements that you had put in place when you introduced those exams to make sure that they promote the curriculum and do not distort or narrow the curriculum, as is often said about high-stakes exams?
Well, it's true that high-stakes exams are not a perfect instrument, but on the other hand, if you compare it, I don't know, for example, to using grades, which are, from school, I mean, that's the comparison is very clear. I mean, grading in school and teachers grading, it's not objective really, and that promotes some kind of, I wouldn't call segregation, but there are some biases which then transfer into students' progressions. It was fascinating when I came to Poland. I was actually working at the OECD at that time. We were making this movie with Pearson Foundation about Poland and Polish reforms. And we wanted some students to tell us what are the benefits of the exams. And I had some of my ideas, right, that it's objective and so on. And the very first students we asked say, why do you like exams? He says, yes, because it shows what I can do. It doesn't depend on what my teachers think, but it's what I can show my real self. And that was it. We basically finished filming for that day. But I was sure all students knew, and that's very important, all students knew that it's all up to them. Basically, if you are perform well on the exam, it doesn't matter what are your grades in the school, you can go to the best school. And that created a lot of good incentives in the systems for students, but also for teachers, because teachers were evaluated from the overall score. It didn't matter whether they have these brilliant best students going to the best universities. They also were evaluated on scores from those who were not performing very well. So that was a big change. I was introducing a transparent, system. I think nowadays we are also moving more to formative assessments, like in France, and that's also very difficult. That's a lot of work for everyone. And of course, automation here helps, and using AI also to score students' works. I mean, it's very controversial among teachers, but that's the future. On the other hand, we also are rethinking exams because, frankly speaking, the formula in which you have the standardized exam in times when you can have, I don't know, glasses with, AI in your glasses for, I don't know, €50, it's becoming difficult. And also this idea that, that you have this one moment in life which is very important and the rest doesn't matter. It's also for me something which we cannot really defend. So we are more thinking about the modern system when you actually collect all this information, but in an objective, standardized way throughout the learning time. I think also we very often look at the secondary schools when it's very competitive, very stressful, but at the same time, when you look at the longitudinal studies, it's very clear that if you don't start strong in preschool and primary school, then you will not see effect in secondary school. So we also want to do some assessments, maybe more formative assessment, but also giving some feedback in primary schools. And last but not least, assessment is one thing, and you can tell teachers, oh, you have to improve that, but how? And now if you go to schools, what we see is that schools rely a lot of different myths, intuitions, or just the common experience. So we also introduce evidence for teachers, very practical evidence on how to teach effectively. There's really a lot of science-based knowledge on how to teach effectively reading, mathematics, and so on. And if you ask teachers, they don't know it. So this is something we need to rely on, not just professional and collaborative learning, but in this collaborative learning, you have to give proper evidence.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I think to tie this all up, I wanted to come back to Bulgaria because I know you're considering reforms on both fronts, the classroom-based assessment and more of the external assessment. From the interventions that you've just heard, is there anything that resonates with the current reforms that you're thinking of? Or do you have any insights from national on how assessments can be improved in Bulgaria?
Всъщност, промените в учебните програми, колкото и добри да станат, колкото и компетентностно рамкови да бъдат, колкото са свързани с променени нагласи, формиране на ценности от децата, ако не се промени системата за оценяване, няма как да се случи, нали, промяната във всяка образователна система, включително и в българската. Затова аз като експерт, като четох вашите препоръки в доклада за България, ми направи впечатление, че те са доста ориентирани към промяна в оценяването и системата на оценяване на нашата образователна система, както в класната стая, така и по посока на външното оценяване. Искам да кажа и това, че последния месец екипа на министър Вълчев внесе много сериозни промени в предложение за промени в Закона за предучилищното и училищно образование, някои от които се отнасят пряко за по-широкото въвеждане на формиращото оценяване, а други по отношение на промяната на външното оценяване в нашата образователна система. Всъщност, първо, по отношение на оценяването в класната стая. Това, което казах и за опита и във Франция, и в Полша, формиращото за оценка в класната стая, различна работа на учителя и по-скоро екипна работа на учителите, постоянно да следят развитието на ученика, да дават обратна връзка както на него, така и на родителите. Прави впечатление това, което във Франция вече се използва електронното портфолио на ученика, където може да се добавя развитие на конкретни умения и справяне с съответни задачи, така че във всеки един момент учителите, родителите да имат достъп до това, да видят как се е справило съответното дете и какви умения е развил в хода на учебния процес. Разбира се, това е много труден процес по отношение на първоначалната подготовка на бъдещите учители, по отношение на тяхната квалификация, съвместна работа. Знам, че от една година, сам тук заместник министър Михайлов може да потвърди, един от фокусите на квалификацията на учителите е точно темата за формиращо оценяване. В центъра на Министерството на образованието и науката в Банкя се провеждат вече 2 години такива целенасочени обучения. Що се отнася до външното оценяване и националното външно оценяване, член ми направи вашите препоръки и предложения за промяна. Първо в посока на неговото провеждане. Това да не се провежда последната седмица, да речем, на дадения етап, а да бъде, да речем, в предходния учебен срок или предходната година. Тоест да нямаме външно оценяване 7-ми клас, както сега е при нас, а в 6-ти клас. Това ще даде възможност всъщност за училищата, където има определени пропуски, където се установи, че има определени пропуски в формирането на уменията, да могат да коригират своята работа до края на съответният етап на обучение на ученици. Това, което също подчерта и министър Вълчев в началото на днешната дискусия, промяната във външното оценяване върви и през неговото съдържателно промяна на самите тестови задачи. Те да бъдат по-практически ориентирани, те да бъдат насочени към установяване на компетентности и умения, които са формирани на учениците. Започнахме тази промяна още миналата година по отношение на външното оценяване на 10-ти клас, където 50% от задачите са с по-голяма практическа насоченост. Тази година продължихме във външно оценяване на 4-ти клас, където също променихме основни задачи, за да бъдат те по-практически насочени и да констатират по-скоро умения, не възпроизвеждане на знания. Но една цялостна промяна, разбира се, това отношение е свързана с много добра съвместна работа и с вашия екип, екипа на доктор Шлайхер, защото както и при първите срещи в Париж, той е подчертал, много по-добре е всъщност ние да използваме нещо постигнато, отколкото да търсим възможност да направим, да стандартизираме задачи, да търсим възможности за промяна в съдържанието на тестовите задачи сами. Така че се надявам в следващите месеци и години съвместно да работим по отношение на изработване на такава банка от задачи, свързани с външно оценяване. И тогава вече може да се въведе по-усилено това, което и колегите подчертаха, електронното оценяване. Ние имаме такъв опит от миналата година, електронно оценяване на уменията по природни науки на учениците в 8-ми клас, в началото на 9-ти клас, където се включиха над 35 000 ученика, над 40 000 ученика. Така че това е също една посока на бъдещо развитие. Благодаря за изказаните така мнения и становища и от колегите от Полша и Франция и мисля, че нашата образователна система трябва да направи тази важна промяна, включително и в културата за оценяване на учителите, както в класната стая, така и по отношение на външното оценяване. И може би само ще довърша това, че последно време в публичното пространство тече дискусия за смисъла на външното оценяване. Мисля, че днес на тази дискусия тук се показа, че външното оценяване има смисъл по отношение на това да се установи равнището, качеството, както на образователна система, така и на усвоените умения от конкретните ученици. И тук още една препоръка, която има във вашия доклад. Всъщност ние трябва да търсим възможности да променим така външното оценяване, особено 7-ми клас, че то да не бъде вход и приемен изпит, прикрит приемен изпит, а наистина да бъде външно оценяване, което да изпълнява определени педагогически, дидактически цели. Благодаря ви.
I just want to thank everyone for your attention and thank the panelists for your open and frank remarks. I think these are opportunities that remind us that no matter where you are in your curriculum reform process, there's always scope for improvement and there's always lessons to learn. And what best way to do this than to speak with peers? And we're very happy that Bulgaria is now part of the OECD family and we have more opportunities to do more exchanges and to learn from each other and with each other. So with that, I will pass on to our facilitator to take further.
Благодаря на участниците в този панел. Сега бих искала да поканя участниците в следващата дискусия обучение и развиване на умения на възрастни. Ще обсъдим темата за обучението през целия живот и развитието на умения за възрастни, един от акцентите, върху които страната ни трябва да насочи усилия. Моля да заповядат на сцената Ваня Тивидошева, директор на дирекция професионално образование и обучение в Министерството на образованието, Искрен Ангелов, директор на дирекция политика на пазара на труда и трудова мобилност, Министерство на труда и социалната политика, Маргарет Мар Стьорм, Свенструд, началник на отдел професионален живот и умения към дирекция Висше образование и умения, Норвегия, Съвета по уменията, Норвегия. И Елена Мухина, старши експерт в отдел професионално образование и обучение за възрастни към Министерството на образованието и науката на Латвия. Модератор на този панел ще бъде Бен Гейм от ОИСР.
Dobar dan. Greetings, everyone. Greetings to our panelists and even hello to Jelena in Latvia. Good to have you with us. So our last session discussed how to modernize school curricula and assessment, and this is an essential foundation for skills and learning. But for Bulgaria to harness people's skills, it is also essential to modernize vocational and adult education and training. So I will present some key recommendations from our accession chapter on adult skills, which really built upon the OECD Skills Strategy project for Bulgaria that was finalized in 2023, and the technical support project that followed for a national skills strategy last year. So today, Bulgarian adults participate less in education and training than adults in all other EU member states, except Greece, when you look at the most recent data. And this participation appears to be decreasing over time. So our accession report made recommendations to improve quality, equity, and governance in adult skills and learning. Regarding quality, employers need to be engaged in designing adult learning programs and often in delivering them to ensure that this training meets real needs in the economy. A great example of this in Bulgaria is sectoral councils, bringing together industry representatives, employer organizations, and vet institutions, among others. It's important that employers are effectively engaged in both formal and non-formal education and training for both youth and adults. Regarding equality, adult education and training needs to be more flexible and accessible if we're going to increase participation rates, especially for adults who lead busy lives and have diverse learning needs. Bulgaria's partial vet qualifications have much potential, but they need to be affordable. We need to ensure that employers recognise and reward these qualifications, and we need to ensure and assure their quality through quality assurance. Finally, as the slide says, let me get my pointer. Improving governance is a foundation for improving quality and equality in skills development. So for the remainder of this presentation, I will be focusing more on getting governance right. Bulgaria's skill system is complex and fragmented. Multiple Bulgarian policies and strategies cover skills, development, and use. One achievement of our technical support project last year, I think, was to actually bring together all of these skills objectives scattered across different policy documents. And a diverse range of actors are responsible for developing and using people's skills. This includes different ministries, municipalities, social partners, education and training institutions, non-government organizations, and others. These challenges are not unique to Bulgaria, but it's important to bring these objectives and these actors together in a coordinated way, as we see other countries are doing. This accession review and the skills strategy projects before them provide a real opportunity for whole of government and stakeholder-inclusive skills policies in Bulgaria. Today, Bulgaria has an opportunity to integrate the priorities and targets in a national skills strategy. 90% of the work has been done, and you are almost touching the finishing line. So let's finish the race. It is also an important time to bring different actors together to make real improvements in skills policies. We have recommended establishing a permanent Bulgarian Skills Policy Council to ensure this progress. It could help draft Bulgaria's strategy, and beyond this, it could oversee, monitor, and report on skills policy development, implementation, and evaluation. Connecting existing skills actors, bodies, and policies to improve coherence and ensure effectiveness. Our previous reports have even provided a model for how such a skills policy council could look in Bulgaria. The goal is not just to create another body. Bureaucracy in itself is not a solution, but to connect it to existing structures and to empower it with real responsibility so that it has impact. Bulgaria could learn from international experience in taking action in skills reforms. Norway set up a skills policy council to oversee implementation of its skills strategy. And it was so effective that even after the skills strategy itself expired, the skills council continued. Latvia is nearing the end of implementing its education development guidelines 2021 to 2027. Which involved 11 ministries and has been a vehicle for reform and progress in their skills system. Very shortly, you will hear from Norway and Latvia in our panel discussion. So our panelists have already been introduced, and without further ado, I'm very pleased to begin our panel discussion with them. So let's start with skills policy priorities in Bulgaria. As you saw, a lot of work's been done over various projects and stages in recent years with Bulgaria. Perhaps we'll start with Vanya and then Iskren. Vanya, what do you see as perhaps the most important skills policy reform for Bulgaria today? And what's needed to make it a success?
Благодаря. Какво считам, че е най-важно от случващото се в реформите, в политиките в България по отношение на развитие на уменията? Разбира се, ще дам акцент върху професионалното образование и обучение, защото цялата система на професионално образование и обучение е в предизвикателството в изключително кратки срокове да осъществява същностни промени и слава Богу правим тези същностни промени с широката подкрепа на работодателите, на образователите, на социалните партньори, защото иначе положителният резултат ще е невъзможен. Защо правим тези промени? Неведнъж беше казано, включително и тук по отношение на системата за управление на уменията, че ние имаме фрагментация и недобра координация по отношение на включването на различните отговорни институции. Именно тези слабости се опитваме и вярвам, че успяваме да преодолеем именно чрез едно добро сътрудничество в форматите на секторните съвети за уменията, с които работим изключително активно за прилагане на реформите в професионалното образование и обучение. Сега сме в ситуация на разработване на нови стандарти за новите професии, които са същностната промяна в съдържанието на професионалното образование и обучение. Тези стандарти имат дълъг път да извървят от гледна точка на активното включване и експертизата, която за всички нас е важна да получим от гледна точка на специалистите в образованието. Това са учителите, директорите на училищата, на професионалните гимназии, на висшите училища, защото те също са включени в нашите партньорски формати, тъй като за нас е важен баланса на квалификациите, да не навлизаме в нещо по-тежко академично, отколкото трябва да бъде в професионалното образование, работодателите, които са практиците и които ни казват, ето това е важно за умения, които да се прилагат в работна среда. Този баланс го осъществяваме с една много активна координация, разбира се, с солидната подкрепа на ръководството на Министерството на образованието и науката, и вярваме, че ще се справим с това предизвикателство. Към момента от 150, само да кажа, че до края на тази година ние трябва да имаме 150 нови държавни стандарта за новите професии, и към момента повече от 50 са разработени, но те са още в процеса на преглед, на отразяване на експертни бележки. След тези стандарти следват учебните програми и целият този път на ново съдържание, разбира се, ще има акцент практическите умения. Това е нашата визия за реформата, която реализираме.
That sounds exhausting, doesn't it? But we're all behind you and remain ready to stand by and support these reforms. Thank you so much for sharing these experiences of engaging diverse stakeholders in vocational education and training. Iskren, the same question. What do you see as the most important skills policy reform for Bulgaria today, and what is needed to make that a success?
Благодаря за въпроса. Преди да кажа няколко думи по отношение на реформата, искам да благодаря на ОИСР, тъй като съвместно с колегите от ОИСР работиме не само по стратегията за умения, работиме и по плана за повишаване на икономическата активност на населението. Защо го казвам? Защото всъщност тези два плана имат връзка. За съжаление, България има едно много ниско равнище за учене през целия живот и разбира се, вероятно, една част от населението, което е извън пазара на труда, просто не участва в образование и обучение. Тоест, чрез реализирането на стратегията за уменията, ние на практика ще допринесем за повишаване на икономическата активност на населението, така че искам да благодаря на колегите още веднъж. Работиме по няколко теми, за да можем да подобрим развитието на пазара на труда в България. По отношение на реформата, от гледна точка на организирането и на финансирането на обученията, ако колегите от МОН всъщност имат ангажимент за цялата нормативна уредба, това, което каза Ваня. Министерството на труда и социалната политика има ангажимент да организира и финансира обучението на възрастни, като всъщност ние сме в самото начало на въвеждането на така наречените индивидуални сметки за обучение. Буквално в началото ще има проект, който е финансиран от TSF+, който е одобрен вчера или на така миналата седмица от Мониторинговия комитет на оперативна програма развитие на човешките ресурси, вече програма, разбира се. В рамките на този проект ние пилотно ще се опитаме да внедриме така наречените индивидуални сметки за обучение, като всъщност, както вече казах, ние сме в началото на процеса, предстои много работа по отношение на това да предложим съответната нормативна уредба, като основната цел е да повишим ученето през целия живот и насърчиме инвестициите в учене през целия живот. Не само от гледна точка на публичния сектор, от гледна точка на работодателите и на работниците. Това е много важно. Разбира се, много внимателно сме проучили опита на Франция, тъй като те са основоположник през 2015 година, когато въвеждат индивидуални сметки за обучение, и ще се опитаме да изградиме и мрежа от кариерни консултанти, които на практика да подпомагат хората при избора на тяхната професия. Разбира се, въпросите са много. Планираме да създадем съвет, който ще определя обученията като списък, които ще бъдат финансирани през индивидуални сметки за обучение. Вероятно ще създадем и секторни фондове за обучение, но това, както казах, ние сме в много начална фаза на тази реформа и тепърва ще има да търсим отговор на всички тези въпроси.
Благодаря, Искрен. So we've heard a bit about the experience in VET, engaging employers in new ways, and about introducing new standards and professions in VET. And on the labour side, the efforts to introduce individual learning accounts. I'd like to turn to our international experts now, starting with Margareta. Do you have any reactions to what we've just heard from Bulgarian colleagues, and perhaps has Norway undertaken similar reforms in these areas? Just 1 or 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's been very interesting to hear about Bulgaria's ongoing reforms to modernize VET and strengthen adult learning. And these are complex areas, and it is encouraging to see the clear commitment to improving their skills system. In Norway, we just recently implemented a new Education Act starting in August 2024. And among the key changes introduced is the indefinite right to free upper secondary education, including VET. And we also introduced the right to vocational re-qualification, enabling the ability to obtain a new vocational certificate if that's needed, or to pursue a first vocational certificate after completing a preparatory academic track. And these expansions of rights are deemed pivotal in ensuring that the Norwegian workforce has the necessary skills that are demanded by the employers. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Margareta. So, Jelena, welcome all the way from Latvia. I hope you can hear us loud and clear.
Yes, I hear you loud and clear, and I hope you too.
Yes, great. So does any of this sound familiar from Latvia's experience implementing its education guidelines?
Okay, first of all, здравейте, дами и господа, and I'm really honored to be here to be a part of this important discussion of Bulgaria accession process to OECD, and this particular discussion on skills issues. As I think that Latvia went through the similar process and the similar changes and challenges as currently Bulgaria are doing. And definitely from my side, what I have heard, the vocational education reform is very essential. And in Latvia, we had the last decade implementing a really massive reform in vocational education by reforming content, network of education institutions, and modularizing and making those content very flexible and very desirable for adult education, opening the vocational education for adults itself. And definitely the individual learning account, which is in Latvia, we already implemented it on the pilot phase, and currently we are piloting, and we start piloting in 2024, and already 70,000 individual learning accounts are open in Latvia, also using these new possibilities by being trained, retrained, skilled, and reskilled, also using this flexible vocational education provision. So we are trying to combine this reform, and it's resonating a lot, and we are ready to share our experience also with Bulgarian colleagues.
Wonderful. Thanks, Jelena. So Bulgaria certainly is not alone in its reform efforts. I mentioned earlier that Latvia and Norway have used high-level strategies or skills councils to implement ambitious skills policy reforms. So I'd like to first turn to Jelena to ask for some of your experiences on this. Briefly tell us, what are the education development guidelines and why did Latvia develop them?
Okay, Latvia's education development guidelines for 2021-27 is a key part of our national development planning system. It's grounded in law and aligned with a long-term sustainable development strategy for Latvia for 2030. And it also reflects our international commitments, like EU priorities, recommendation from international institutions, also OECD. And the overall aim of the strategy was to provide high quality, inclusive, and future-oriented education opportunities for all, from early childhood education to adult learning. So it's quite broad scope. And what makes this strategy like unique in Latvia, and not only in Latvia, is actually this strategy is the only sectoral policy planning document that first must receive approval from our parliamentary commission before it's going approved to the cabinet of ministers. And this actually reflects the high-level importance of the strong political and societal commitment behind it. And the substantive motivation to make the strategy different from previous years from standard education strategy was clear for us. We needed to move beyond the sense and those conventional education approach and to move to models for these learning outcomes and future-oriented ready skills. And this is why the strategy has its own brand. It's named Future Skills for Future Society. And we use the term skills in a broader sense, encompassing knowledge, values, skills, and attitudes, so fully aligned with the Latvian understanding of what competences mean. And the strategy was developed inclusively, involving not just education stakeholders, but as Ben mentioned, many ministries were involved, also social partners, NGOs, and others. So this helped us to straighten Latvia's all-of-government approach and the culture of collaboration itself. And finally, the guidelines are desirable to be understandable for the broader society. We developed them as a readable document, starting with being describing these global trends in education and local labor market forecasts and particularities. When we describe a vision of education, of future education vision, now it's already a reality in 2027, that individuals, institutions, and systems should look like. It's like a societal agreement on. And guidelines present also situation analysis, draw heavily on OECD skills strategy, diagnostic report, and we also clearly link both Latvian and EU framework, policy framework in this document. And the operational part includes measurable outcomes, indicators, 10 action directions, and about 25 specific measures, and also budget details broken down by year and funding sources for each of the measures, where already allocated or additional needed. So to conclude, the education development guidelines have not only delivered a robust national strategy, but they also have fostered a stronger cooperation and dialogue across Latvian society while we are preparing these guidelines, and reinforced our shared vision for the future-ready education system as such. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Jelena. So for making a very convincing case of a well-designed cross-sectoral strategy for education and skills. And we look forward to seeing the results of the midterm and final evaluations. I think what might be helpful at this stage, before we go back to hear from our Bulgarian experts, is to just hear from Margaret and Jelena, maybe starting with you, Jelena, now that we have you on a roll. What are 2 or 3 key lessons from developing your national strategy for skills that you think would be relevant for Bulgaria? Perhaps what has enabled success or what has prevented it? Just 2 or 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for these questions. And definitely one of the key lessons learned from Latvia's experience developing our national strategy was importance to broad and early stakeholder engagement. As I mentioned earlier, from very beginning, Latvia involved not just the policymakers, but also employers, trade unions, educator practitioners, parents, students, representatives, and social partners in the process. So, and this inclusive process helped to build this shared own vision and ensure this strategy reflected really diverse perspective. And it wasn't just about inviting people for the meetings. It's not was just presenting a ready prepared draft, but it was stakeholders' engagement into and involvement into the organization of the process. So our stakeholders organize the focus groups, drafting documents, even moderating discussions. The second lesson is about balancing ambitions with realism. And Latvia managed this by anchoring its strategy in both rigorous diagnostic work and realistic budget planning, which with the support of the OECD. We really conducted a delighted assessment of current skills landscape in all sectors of education and non-formal education. We pair it with strategic forecasting and make this strategy future-proof. And thanks to this legislation requirement that the budget estimates to be a part of the strategy, discussion on funding, which is important, and also including the social funds, European structural funds, were integrated early on in the discussion. So this helped to keep the strategy both grounded, taking into account realistic situation, and also forward-looking. And then maybe third takeaway is importance to maintain a flexibility. The Latvia strategy set out long-term goals and KPIs over 7 years period for the 7-year periods. But implementation happens through the rolling 2-3 years action plans. This allows us to adopt the emerging needs and emerging challenges and to adjust activities and resources needed while still tracking this progress towards the long-term objectives. And of course, this process was not without challenges. And one of the biggest was to finding the real balance between being too detailed or being overly vague. And similarly, we had to avoid crafting in the strategy with, all the too present focus or to be too far from the reality. And in looking more than a year to consult and to negotiate with all those involved bodies, this perfect and a good strategy, but this time paid off. And definitely nowadays, looking past, we need to say that the strategy had been developed in the pre-COVID period environment in 2020. And since then, many processes have been fostered and accelerated. So currently, the pandemic shows that their importance to be able to really react more faster, more quickly to provide response and adapt strategies in real time. So overall, Latvia's experience shows that the meaningful stakeholders' involvement and strong active analytical support is really essential, but also we need to maintain the flexibility, and this will help to build a structural planning process over the whole cycle of planning the strategy.
Thank you, Jelena. I might just look to a colleague to do a quick time check because I want to finish on time. So if you give me a signal at some point. I will give Bulgarian colleagues the opportunity to maybe ask a follow-up question or two. But first, Margaret, what are 2-3 key lessons from Norway for establishing a body to oversee your national skills strategy, to allocate responsibility and to ensure accountability?
Thank you. I'd like to explain shortly about the Skills Policy Council first. It was established in 2017 as a part of our national skills policy process, and the goal was to bring better coordination to a fragmented policy landscape and strengthen cooperation across sectors and levels of government. And the council was also given, as you mentioned in your presentation, the task to oversee the follow-up of the national skills policy strategy by facilitating cooperation among the wide range of strategy partners and providing input to policy development. And from the very beginning, the council included ministries, social partners, the Sami parliament, the voluntary sector, and county authorities. And this broad membership reflects how skills policy intersects with labor market policy, education, integration, and regional development. And the council is a high-level advisory body. It's chaired by the State Secretary of the Ministry of Education and Research. And its task is to identify key issues, exchange perspectives, and provide input to government on skills policy. And we also have an administrative group that supports the council, and that's coordinated by my directorate. And the group prepares the high-level meetings and also allow us to go deeper into the topics before they reach the political level. And as for the success factors, I'd like to highlight 3 things. First, a whole-of-government approach. The council includes ministries responsible for education, labor, business, and local government, and more recently, also the Ministry of Health and Care Services and Defense. And that gives us a shared framework for coordinating policies and avoiding conflicting measures. And second, the 2-level structure. The high-level council meets about 4 times a year, and between those meetings, the administrative group prepares the topics, maintains momentum, and ensures continuity. And that structure supports accountability and follow-through. And third, broad representation and its trade-offs. From the beginning, the Skills Policy Council included both national and regional authorities and education providers and the voluntary sector. And this breadth gives the necessary legitimacy and relevance, but it also means that we need strong facilitation. With so many different voices in the room, it can be harder to align on priorities or act quickly. And the council is advisory. It's not a decision-making body, and its strength lies in dialogue and not enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Margaret. So let's go back to Bulgaria. Maybe we'll start with Iskren. How could Bulgaria apply the lessons that we've heard about from Norway, from Latvia, and perhaps do you have any questions for our international experts yourself?
Благодаря за възможността. По отношение на Латвия, аз мятам, че нашите планове трябва да ги правим така като колегите по-гъвкави и по-достъпни не само за полисимейкърите и за хората, които участват в процеса, а и защо не и за работодателите и за лицата, които се обучават, просто да знаят всъщност общата картинка. И освен това, като мотивация имам предвид да се включат в обучение, за да си намерят по-добра работа или по-високо възнаграждение, нека да имат и отговорност за това, че те са част от едно общо цяло и допринасят със своето индивидуално развитие за развитието на страната. По отношение на съвета, сега, тук ние сме също в самото начало и аз бих задал въпрос всъщност към този съвет. Разбрахме, че е с двустепенна структура. Има ли работни групи или подсъвети, които се ангажират с конкретни въпроси? Какво имам предвид? Аз вече го казах, при въвеждането на индивидуални сметки за обучение обсъждаме да има съвет, който ще определя в каква посока ще бъдат инвестирани публичните ресурси, какъв ще е списък с обучение, които ще бъдат финансирани. Трябва да намерим връзката между този съвет, който ще определя всъщност развитието на индивидуални сметки за обучение и съвета за умения, който ще е национално ниво. Дали има подобен опит в Норвегия? Благодаря за възможността.
Thank you. We have no permanent working groups, but we establish working groups when necessary. We recently had a group consisting of the 8 biggest social partner organizations in Norway, looking into how we could develop a skills reform for working life in Norway. enforcing the tripartite cooperation on that area. And we also have had working groups looking on how to develop a better system for recognition and validation of prior learning, and also how to implement ICT and develop digital competence in working life, for instance.
Thank you very much. Vanya, how do you think Bulgaria could apply lessons from Norway and Latvia? And do you have any questions for our international guests?
Да, благодаря. Считам, че примерите, които чухме, са много полезни и част от идеите дори не е трудно да се реализират и в нашия контекст. По-конкретно намирам за изключително практично и важно това, което в Латвия е направено по отношение на техните насоки за развитие на образованието, да бъдат представени на разбираем за обществото език. По този начин някак цялото общество да знае какви са усилията на институциите, на лицата, на всички, на цялата държава за развитието на уменията и за бъдещето на практика. Мисля, че това е хубав урок за нас и ние бихме могли най-малкото така по по-разбираем език за родителите и учениците, например, да си дадем основните идеи в реформата за професионалното образование и обучение. Работим в тази посока, но трябва с повече усилия да говорим с разбираем език на всички. Другият интересен модел е за гъвкавите пътеки. Това е един проблем, който за мен лично е важен експертен интерес и много ми се иска така повече примери практически да чуя, за да видя как се прилагат такива гъвкави пътеки в Латвия, в Норвегия. По отношение на включването на родители и ученици, считам, че е изключително ценен модел стратегиите за развитие на уменията, подходите за развитие на уменията да бъдат с участието на учениците и родителите. Любопитно ми е това как се случва в практически план, на какъв тип форуми, колко често и съответно за Норвегия е много важен този подход, който включва представителите на правителството, цялостния подход за координация. Ние имаме добър опит в системата на професионалното образование и обучение, в консултативния съвет за професионално образование и обучение, но като цялостен междуминистерски подход с включване на много заинтересовани страни по повече теми, надхвърлящи професионалното образование и обучение, ми се струва, че тепърва трябва доста да работим.
Thank you very much, Vanya. So perhaps we have time for a 1-minute reply from our two international guests. So Margrethe, do you want to go first?
Thank you. As part of the new Education Act, we also introduced a new model for vocational education and training for adults with modularized pathways towards the trade certificate. And we combined it with extensive use of validation of prior learning so that we assess the participants and decide on which step in the pathway they should start, and then we work very closely with different enterprises. So a lot of the training takes place in the different workplaces, and that's a very efficient way to get a faster qualification. And we also revised the exams system so that it corresponds with the new curricula. But the quality of the trade certificate is the same as if you had done it in the traditional way. It's quite new, so we haven't really evaluated it yet, but the partial evaluations has been very good, and it also seems that more people are completing the paths towards the certificates using the modularized pathway. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And Jelena, perhaps a final response or final word from you.
Yes, thank you very much. We are talking about the inclusion from both ways. First of all, this flexibility, as you mentioned, as well from our vocational system, where we reformed the possibility to enter vocational education at later stages of training program, aimed by the assessment of the real skills. So if a person can prove that their skills are enough, they are not supposed to continue to go through the whole education process. And also the partial qualification is also introduced in our system. But I'm also heard the question about the involvement of parents and students itself in the preparation of the strategy, and it was in the process of preparation strategy, where more than 500 participants were involved in discussion and providing the feedback about the strategy. And the pupils and student representatives and parents representatives, the organizational representative, were the part of this process, a big process. They were invited also to participate and to provide the feedback and a vision, participate in this development of the vision of a future education skills. But yeah, they were involved in the preparation process of the strategy.
Well, very important to have this involvement at the strategic level, but also at the level of implementing vocational education and training reforms and curriculum reforms and assessment reforms, which we heard about earlier today. Well, that brings us to the end of this panel discussion. And as I think the last OECD voice today, I just wanted to say again, thank you so much to the Ministry of Education, Natalia, Deputy Minister, all the team at the Ministry of Education for your strong involvement in this work and for being a pleasure to work with. And thank you to our international guests, Jelena, Margreta, for joining us today, and Vanya and Iskren for representing Bulgaria from the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Labour. I'm pleased to now hand back to our moderator.
Благодаря на участниците в панела. Каня на сцената Наталия Митева, съветник на министра на образованието и науката, за заключителни думи. Заповядайте.
Сега имам трудната задача да обобщя с няколко думи това, което се случи днес, но също така зная, че стоя между вас и обяда, което е една много трудна роля, така че аз ще бъда бърза. Предварително ще ви кажа, че обяда ще бъде на този етаж и много ще се радваме да останете, за да поговорите малко с нашите гости и участници. Първо бих искала и аз да благодаря за участието на нашите международни гости на семинара, тъй като смисъла на това да сме част от семейството на ОИСР е да имаме именно тази възможност да общуваме с колеги от цял свят. Така че аз бих искала да благодаря на тези от тях, които дойдоха тук, отделиха от времето си, за да дойдат в България, на Елън, на Маргрет, на Мачех, както и на Елена, която се включи онлайн. Искам да благодаря за професионализма и смелостта на нашите български участници в панелите, на госпожа Ваня Тевидошева, на Искрен Ангелов от Министерството на труда и социалната политика, на професор Цоков в първия панел. Благодаря също така за професионализма и изключително гъвкавото отношение на колегите от ОИСР, на Лин Абират, която води целия ни процес по присъединяване от екипа на доктор Шлайхер, на Бен Гейм, който е въвлечен в работата си с България от преди аз да дойда в Министерството. Бен, благодарим ти. На Андрея Шлайхер, който с изключително лично отношение се отнася към нашето партньорство, и въобще на целият екип, който стои за тях. Да благодаря на тези хора от Министерството, които направиха възможно това събитие, тъй като доста работа се случва, което не се вижда никога, по синхронизиране на панелите, на превода на презентациите, координиране на визитите. Това са много хора от Министерството. Благодаря ви най-искрено за вашата работа. Едни аплодисменти и за тях, ако можем. Разбира се, на ръководния екип, госпожо Михайлова, благодаря ви за това, че останахте и до края. На министъра за визията и на всички хора, които го подкрепят в смелостта да направим едни реформи, които действително ще имат отпечатък върху бъдещето на България. Много неща се казаха по същество. Искам само да отбележа тематично, че днес стана дума за това не просто какво да направим, но защо да го правим. И може би комуникирането на тази визия и на въпроса защо е сред най-важните комуникации, които едно министерство, правейки реформи, може да направи. И това защо трябва да се комуникира както на различните заинтересовани страни, така и на най-важните единици в образователната система, на учителите. Тези, които всъщност ще преведат реформите в практика в класната стая. И всъщност в визията и презентациите от откриващия панел на министър Вълчев и на Андрея Шлахер, както и в първия експертен панел, стана ясно, че системите и инструментите за подкрепа на учители са ключови за това една реформа на учебните програми, на оценявания, всъщност да се преведе в практика в реалната работа с учениците. ОИСР ще ни подкрепя в нашите реформени усилия за учебни програми, не само по отношение на документите, но действително превеждането им в инструментариум в подкрепа на учителите. И също така дискутираме конкретно предложение от тях по заявка на министър Вълчев да ни подкрепят и в реформените ни усилия за оценяванията, както в класната стая, така и националните оценявания. Искам да ви споделя, че ние работим с тях и по няколко други проекта, свързани, например, с изграждане на лидерски капацитет в училище за дигитална трансформация. Това е създаване на нови роли и екипи за дигитална трансформация по модела на най-успешните държави в света, но и по модел на това, което вече успешно се случва в някои училища в България. Успоредно с това имаме възможност да се включим и в други техни програми и изследвания, които ще споделя за вас, тъй като те касаят вашата ежедневна работа в училищното образование. Освен ПИЗа, която добре познавате, те всъщност адаптират банката от задачи ПИЗа в една програма, наречена ПИЗа за училища, към която ние ще се присъединим от следващата учебна година. И набор от училища пилотно ще имат възможност да се включат в това да изпробват ПИЗа за училища като формиращ инструмент на ниво училище, за да може да имате данни всъщност на ниво класове и ученици, как се справят вашите ученици с такива по-приложно ориентирани задачи и да можете да подкрепите учителите в и оценяването и в преподаването в тази посока. Дискутираме включването на България в едно изследване на уменията на възрастното население, на икономически активното население, от 16, ако не се лъжа, до 64 или 18 до 64. ПИАК, в което заедно с Министерството на труда и социалната политика ние обмисляме как да можем, това се случва веднъж на 10 години, да можем да се включим, за да можем да видим реално уменията на нашата работна сила по отношение на дигитални умения, на меки умения, на такива фундаментални знания, не свързани толкова с конкретните професии, а именно тези умения, които всъщност могат да им помогнат да се адаптират към различни работни места и да калибрираме политиките си спрямо тези данни, които трябва да ни подпомогнат. Най-вече бих искала да кажа, че за мен едно голямо вдъхновение в днешния ден беше това как да подкрепим позитивната промяна в културата на учене, към това не просто да възпроизвеждаме знания, не да повтаряме модели, които познаваме, а по-скоро да трансформираме цялото си образование към това то да бъде адаптивно за един пазар на труда, за едно общество, за едно търсене на умения, което ще бъде много по-гъвкаво, отколкото сме го познавали до сега, и за едни изисквания на глобален мащаб, които ние не знаем какви ще бъдат в годините, които следва да видим. Така че адаптивността и възможността, както нашите млади хора да учат, така и цялата ни система да учи, ще бъде ключова за напред. Промяната понякога е трудна и цената ѝ понякога е висока, но цената на ниските образователни резултати е още по-висока. Затова съм уверена, че с общи усилия на тези лидери като вас, които са днес тук, на Министерството на образованието и науката и на нашите колеги от другите държави и от ОИСР, ние ще успеем да направим смели крачки напред. Благодаря ви много.
Благодарим на всички присъстващи днес. Каним всички участници от днешната конференция на обяд. Заповядайте.